Father in heaven, thank you very much yet for another opportunity to share your word, share some insights, and help people to be able to identify some of the most important things that they could do in their lives in order to improve their well-being, improve their brain function, improve their sleep, as well as be able to prevent some of the challenges that come on with later life if we are not able to keep your bodies temperate. And so, Lord, as we speak, I pray that may your Holy Spirit actually be able to pronounce the words that I need to share with everyone so that they can see you and hear you and understand your word as opposed to what I'm thinking about. So I pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so a little bit of quick background. So for those who were not here yesterday, I'm Dr. Simon Pedzisi. In my day job, I work as head of dementia care for a company called Opal Healthcare. Now, Opal Healthcare specializes in aged care across Australia. So we've got over 15,000, almost 15,000 beds across the country in all states except for Tasmania, the Northern Territory, and the ACT. Now, within my day job, I deal a lot with neurological conditions that often then become exacerbated when people start to have dementia. So some of the things that I deal with is, well-being from the context of when people are living with stroke, when people are living with Parkinson's, when people are living with dementia, when people are living with anything that changes the way the brain functions. And a lot of my intervention and the way I do my consultations, whether it's with other multidisciplinary team members, whether it's the mental health team, the GPs, geriatrician, and so forth, I always focus back on how does the body work? How was the body designed? And therefore, if it's not working the way that it should, therefore, what is it that we might need to consider that can help to reset the brain? Why? Because God made us in a perfect way, except that when sin came in, then things started to change. And therefore, a lot of my interventions are non-pharmacological, and you will hear a lot about it when we talk about polypharmacy in the next coming days. And prior to working for the company I'm working for 21 years, I worked in England, where I held a number of different positions, from Director of Clinical Services, Director of Nursing. I also held national roles. I was, at some point, the national lead for palliative care in the UK, and my role was to strategize how to support people to have a good death towards end of life. And yes, there is something called a good death, which actually is one of the reasons why yesterday we talked about, how do you maintain well-being? Because for those who were here yesterday, I shared how, in my interaction with a lot of the people that were living in our care communities or facilities, our average age was about 95. And 10% of people who were coming into our aged care were over the age of 100. So what we were looking at was how do we redefine a model of care that can support people who are living up to 105 with multiple comorbidities? How do you support them to live well? And from research and some of the things I shared yesterday, we know that people can maintain well-being regardless of their physical state, regardless of their mental state, and regardless also of their social state. So a lot of the things that I'm sharing with you today are an accumulation of things that I've learned, developed, implemented, studied, evaluated over the past 21 years, both in Europe as well as in Australia. So research is one of my pet hobbies. I really am passionate about research, but my approach is slightly different because I know research is, sometimes it takes a blanket approach to this is how you do things. But the missing bit usually is this is how God would like us to do things. And therefore, I bring that context in the conversations, and you will see a lot of that being shared today. So, today we're talking about how would you maintain a healthy brain? How would you maintain a healthy brain? Now, I want you to think about this. What is your relationship with your brain? Do you have a relationship with your brain? If you do, if I were to ask your brain and ask you not to answer the question, what would your brain tell me about what type of a friend you are? Think about some of your friends, especially those you don't have anymore. What if every time you want to go out, you had to compromise and do what they wanted? What if every time you wanted to choose something, you had to actually succumb to their choices because they're overpowering, they're always telling you what to do, they're always telling you how to do things and how to run your business? Would you still be friends with them? The only difference in that scenario is that you can walk away from your friends, except your brain cannot walk away from you. But what you will see is an accumulation of changes that start to then present themselves as you get older and as that relationship starts to deteriorate. So as we talk about a number of research sort of concepts and a number of ideas that I'm going to be sharing with you, I want you to always think about how does that actually fare and how does that actually compare in terms of your relationship with your brain. So that's what I want you to think about. Now, yesterday, I highlighted a couple of things which were very important, and the audience I had yesterday were really good because they were very kind, okay? So the first one I shared with them was the fact that English is my third language, okay? Now, being the third language, it means that also when I get passionate and excited about the topics that I really love, that combination often results in a very fast pace of talking. Now, when that happens, remember what the pastor talked about? Yes? For those who were here yesterday, what's the cue word? Oh, I'm testing your memory now. What is that? Amen. Yes. So when I'm going too fast and you can't keep up, just say amen. Don't pull the trigger in order to open up the platform for me to disappear. We didn't have to do that yesterday. You don't have to do it today, okay? Just say amen and we'll be okay. The second thing I shared with everyone yesterday was the fact that sometimes, not all times, clearly not yesterday, sometimes my voice can make people sleep. All right? And I did say to the audience yesterday, you don't have to prove it to me. You don't have to show me. I already know that. So your job is to make sure that in the next hour, you stay awake. And if you don't stay awake, what happens? Someone will raise their hand, especially the person sitting next to you. They will not wake you up, and then I will know who's sleeping, so we'll ask you a question. Okay, so that was the agreement. We already voted on it yesterday and it's signed and sealed. So if you're joining us today, that's the protocol for our session. All right, now that we've got that out of the way, let's talk about your brain health. But I want to highlight 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 7, and it says, "The end of all things is at hand. Therefore be self-controlled and sober-minded for the sake of your prayers." That's a pretty profound statement, isn't it? So what it means is that if, for example, you haven't actually considered whether or not you are self-controlled and or sober-minded, chances are some of the things you might be praying for might not actually happen. So I want us to actually just reflect on that verse and think about, again, the relationship that you have with your brain. Are you in your relationship sober-minded? Are you in your relationship self-controlled? And therefore, temperance becomes one of the key words that I will keep referring to throughout our conversation today. I also like this statement, which I thought I'll just share with you. Mental power cannot be got from ill-fed brains. Remember what Pastor GT said, if you put garbage into your brain, what do you expect? Garbage, okay? And we know, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, that the definition of idiosyncrasy is doing something continuously and expecting what? A different result. So now that we know that, then again, let's think about where does our mental power come from? And what are some of the things that will affect your mental power? Because when you don't have mental power, then chances are your ability to make choices, your ability to make the right choices becomes altered. And as that becomes altered, then again, your well-being, as well as all other things which are physical, mental, and social become a challenge. Let's do a quick recap from what we covered yesterday for the benefit of those who joined us only today. We redefined what well-being is. So contrary to what social media says, contrary to what clinicians say well-being is mainly defined quite simply as the following. It is a state of complete physical, mental, and social comfort. And why is social comfort, mental comfort, and physical comfort important? Because when you're talking about comfort, it means that even when you've got cancer and you know that maybe you've only got a year, you've only got 2 days, you can still be mentally, physically, and socially in a state of well-being. Why? Because it is not the absence of disease. It is not the absence of infirmity, but it is the ability to change the way you see your world such that you don't remove the pain, but you can just cope with the pain. And that's a very different definition from what the world tells us about what well-being should look like. And therefore, again, we say that if we look at it from a biblical perspective, the Bible talks about shalom. And what is shalom? Well, shalom is peace, okay? And where is that peace sort of heading towards, or what is it looking at? Well, good health means a harmony of a healthy mind, a healthy body, a healthy spirit, and healthy relationships. So whilst yesterday we talked about well-being, today I'm asking the question, what is your relationship with your brain? Is it healthy or not? And if it's not, then today you are in the right session, because we will talk about what you can do in order to change that. In terms of defining well-being, I help people to just understand the three main components, which are, again, the physical, social, and the mental. And what we highlighted was that the mental health is the biggest component that actually contributes more to your well-being. Therefore, quite simply, if you wanted to do a very simple equation, in order to improve your well-being, focus on your mental health. Why? Because it's the one that drives your social health. And your social health then drives your physical health. So a lot of people go and buy all sorts of products to try and address the physical health. No wonder why being in well-being from a worldly perspective becomes very expensive, but also unachievable. But what we're saying is that if you understand that the mental health is the biggest component, then you also need to know what that breaks down into. And it quite simply breaks down into your psychology, which is the way you see your world, which then triggers and drives the way you respond to it. So, if I've got diabetes, the way I see my world is going to be very different, because when we say, let's go and have dessert, I'm going to feel like, well, actually, that's going to be hard and I can't participate, and therefore I need to consider different things which might actually make me feel isolated. And therefore, if I feel isolated, then it means from a social perspective, I actually don't feel included, and therefore my sense of belonging starts to change. So if you are a friend that always likes ice cream and always wants to go to the ice cream parlor, then it means that our relationship will start to change and my connection with you will start to change, which also means that if I start to compromise, then chances are my optimum health can actually be affected by the relationship that I have with you. So your psychology, which is the way you see your world, directly drives your emotional response, which directly drives your sense of belonging and therefore your optimum health. So we say that if you really want to change your well-being, the simplest thing is to ask yourself, how do you see your world? How does your background alter or change or distort the way you see your world today? How does maybe trauma exposure affect the way you see your world today, and therefore the way you react to what's happening around you, which can then again cause you from a mental health perspective to feel anxious, distressed, stressed, and worried, and all sorts of things. So, we actually were able to identify that there's a very simple method, and I call it the SIMPED method. Okay, and what is that? Well, first of all, we identified that to be in good state of well-being, you need good relationships, because love is at the center of what all the research was talking about. And God's love is consistent. And therefore, if your relationship with God is at its optimum and in a very good state, then chances are you won't be chasing the world looking for love, which is inconsistent. And we also talked about how young people are affected by, exposure and the relationships that are at home, and how that, in later lives can change things. But when you have God's love, then again, you are invested in a much more stable foundation and position. We talked about brain health, and we'll cover a lot today. And we also talked about the fact that you have the power of choice. Well-being is a choice. you can choose how your well-being and your relationship actually forms. But the devil, because of all the social media and all the other definitions that he's giving us, he's saying that you don't have the power. Still, with the power of choice, you can choose to see your world positively or negatively. Temperance was a key factor, which again will help us to understand some of the things that you can maintain in order to keep your brain in a healthy state. So today, having built that foundation yesterday, what are we talking about today? Well, we're going to look at the function of the brain. We're going to look at the lifestyle choices that you could make, and we're also going to look at practical steps that will improve your own brain health. Now, I'm going to ask you a question, but before I do that, I'm going to help you to understand this part. I'm not going to go clinical or medical. I'm going to try and keep things as simple and practical as possible. And the reason is because you know a lot already. I'm sure you've read, you've consulted Dr. Google, you've consulted everybody else under the sun, so you have the information. What I want to do is to just bring that information and help you translate it into practical steps that are achievable. So how are we going to do that? Well, I've got a question for you, and we're going to use a scenario to try and illustrate the points that I want to raise. And this scenario is based on what would you do? What would you do if you wanted to invade another country? If you were the president, if you were the prime minister, if you were the king of a country that was next to it, a lucrative country which was doing quite well, and you decided, you know what, we want to expand our territory and we want to be able to actually, take over that particular country. What would you do? What's that? What would you do? Destabilize their government. Okay, that's a good strategy. What else? Poison their water. Okay, hopefully your water source is not coming from the same stream as well, and you work out whether the top or the bottom. Yes?
You would determine how strong or how like your strengths and weaknesses.
Okay, yep. Strength and weaknesses, yes? Aim for the headquarters, okay, and hopefully that they don't have children who are going to be succeeding and actually being able to take over the parliament and everything. Yes, what else?
Send out spies.
Send? Or send some spies. Okay, yeah, all good thoughts, all good thoughts. But what if I told you that there's a much simpler way of doing it, which is cost-effective, and in actual fact, from an economic perspective, you actually get paid for being able to destroy that particular country? What if I told you that it's got nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction or actually setting foot into that particular country until when you're invited to come in? What would you say to me? I think some of you are thinking, Simon, tell us so that we can actually work out what to do. Now, here's the thing. What if I was the king of a kingdom called Simpad? And looking at the globe, there's Australia, and this is my kingdom right next to Australia. And Australia is the country that I want to invade. How would I do it? Now, let me share with you a few simple ways that I would do it. I would use a chain strategy. And what is my chain strategy? Well, first of all, I'm going to actually make sure that everything that people buy and eat and drink is going to have sugar. That's my strategy. I'm going to make sure that every child is going to be addicted and connected to sugar. Why? Because sugar actually accelerates brain cell death. So in children, it reduces their brain development because the brain develops up to the age of about 25, and therefore if I can help to change the chemical reactions that actually help with neuroplasticity and other factors of binary cell division, then that means that they won't have enough people who are fit enough to think straight and physically fit to be able to join their army, and I just have to sit and wait. And in the meanwhile, I'll also be paid for all the products that people get so connected to. That's my first strategy. The second strategy will also develop technology and make it so cheap that every child will be so connected to video games. And I'll make some of the video games so subtle, they are biblical for those Christian people who think, oh, this is not good. And I also make sure that some of them are, Minecrafts, such that they are considered from those who are looking at child development perspective as if they're actually helpful to actually get kids to learn things. And yet kids will get so addicted. And I know that from a brain function perspective, when a child is addicted to one particular activity, then as they get older, then their ability to be addicted by other multiple factors becomes very easy without anyone noticing it. I'll also try and make sure that I increase, processed foods, carbs, fat, and all that, so that people become obese. All I need to aim for is just 70% of the population to just be overweight, and that's it. I don't need to aim for 100% or anything, just 70%. Why? Because a lot of the comorbidities that people will develop as they start to grow older are going to be associated with what they eat. Therefore, when it comes to walking into the country, there won't be any form of resistance. I'll also make sure that every child is provided with screen time. Screen time, again, that will help with, being addicted, that will also help with not sleeping well, that will also help with not being able to concentrate well. Therefore, I then multiply services to support children with hyperactivity and then give them medication such that once they are on that medication for the rest of their lives, their chemical function of their brain relies on the medication. What else will I do? Well, I'll give the adults also something to do. Blue light, UV light. Make sure that you have screen time all the way up to the time that you need to go and sleep. That way, you don't actually maintain a good circadian rhythm that allows your brain to rest, replenish, that allows your body organs to rest and replenish, and therefore, it's a matter of time before fatigue, depression, anxiety, and everything else that will require medication to kick in. And therefore, if I'm running the pharmacies, then I get paid to destroy and overtake the country. What else will I do? Well, I'll also create programs that are absolutely mind-blowing and cause people to be so connected with those programs that even on Sabbath, for those Adventists that I know, I've heard they're Adventists in Australia, they can't wait for Sabbath to finish so that they can go and watch their programs. And therefore, again, from a well-being perspective, social isolation. And again, because when you're so connected to TV programs, your ability to produce oxytocin from social interaction and relationships starts to diminish, so you find people boring. And therefore, for every interaction you have, when you walk away, the first thing you do is criticize, complain about those people, and so forth. So you never find anything good in anyone. Simple strategy. I will also make sure that in Australia, you have more pharmacies than fuel stations. Now, on a side note, when I first came to Australia, and we moved from England about 3.5 years ago, this is something that struck me. There are more pharmacies than fuel stations. And I was saying to my wife, Sylvia, have you noticed something which is odd? For every almost 200 meters or so, there's a chemist, there's a pharmacy. But if you need fuel, you might need to actually drive maybe 500 meters before you get to the next fuel station. So that would be a simple strategy, and make sure that there's medication and there's a prescription for everything that people experience, and therefore people don't have to take ownership of well-being. They just rely on the very simple intervention of a tablet for everything else, even including either a tablet for sleeping, a tablet for weight loss, a tablet for you name it, there'll be a tablet for something. My other strategy, and this one is a very important one, that I will deploy is, again, I will look for where Adventists worship. And what I would do, because I hear that Adventists have got a special health message that focuses on temperance, that focuses on, a diet that is balanced and all these things. So what I will do is I won't tell them to stop eating meat or anything. Okay? I'll just dilute their message so that I divide them. It's either they fight against not eating meat or they fight for eating meat. That would be my strategy. Okay? The other things I'll do is that because I know that during the week they might live very healthy, I will start to make sure that on Sabbath, that's the time when I load all the carbs and I load all the sugar in their children. So when they wake up in the morning, they'll have Cocoa Puffs and then they'll have a juice, yes? And then when they come to Sabbath school, I'll make sure that in every class, they've got a bowl of sweets and chocolates such that when they recite their Bible text and get it right, they're given sugar and sweets as a reward, which also means that as they get older, they start to associate and assimilate sugar to a positive reward effect. That's what I'll do. I also make sure that when it's time for, if they're having potluck lunch or anything, they've got a good spread of crisps and everything else, high salt and so forth, so that when they start to eat, their choice is influenced by the things that are appetizing better. And I know that for that day, if they go to Sabbath every week, that's enough time in a year to start changing their chemical function in their brain, and therefore their ability to concentrate on the Word of God means that their mind is not as sober. If I can get them when they're at a young age, then I don't have to worry about them when they get to teenage years. That will be my strategy. And finally, or maybe second from last, I'll make sure that people don't sleep enough. I know that the brain requires about 8 hours on average of sleeping well, and we will talk about sleep, and that's, I think it's tomorrow or the next day, and I'll just make sure that you've got enough things to do such that you don't sleep well. And if I do all these things well, then your stress levels means that you can never be in a state of well-being. And at that point, what are you going to need? Misinformation around if you're stressed and you're physically not well, if you're mentally not well, and if you're socially not well, there's a solution. Take multivitamins and they'll help you to regain your brain health. But in actual fact, I always use an analogy. If your car works on diesel, how many of you are drivers? Yeah? If your car works on diesel, if you're running out of fuel and you stop at a fuel station and they only sell petrol, if you take petrol and you add it into your tank, will it solve your issue? What does it do? Creates more issues, right? But what if I just misinformed you and just told you, do you know what? Just take some of these multivitamins, which are synthesized, and also, again, depending on your body, because our bodies are unique. Your DNA and your RNA is unique, which means the way you process and you metabolize chemicals and compounds and so forth is very different. But what if I just had a pill that I sell to people that are from African background, Asian background, European background, and I said, this will fix your issues, even though our biological makeup is slightly different? How would that work? Well, that would be my end game. Now, what do you think about this strategy? Good one? Is it practical? Yeah, very practical and easy to implement, and also I don't have to lift a finger and shoot anyone at all, okay? All that would actually just destroy the society and destroy the mechanisms and how people feel. Now, how would that do that? Well, there's a brain chain action that I want you to be aware of. Brain health is based on these 3 main aspects. Number 1, your brain has a chemical formula and a chemical balance that needs to be maintained all the time. When that chemical balance or homeostatic function changes, it means that your brain function will also start to change. And therefore, yesterday, we talked about some of the hormones that are produced when we are stimulated in doing different activities. So when your brain chemical reactions are changed, it means that the communication between neural pathways is altered. You might not be able to produce oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, and therefore the way you see your world and the way you feel about your world becomes very different. The second aspect of the chain reaction is that the things that I'm going to be throwing at in Australia are designed to make sure that when the chemical reactions are not at their optimum and your pH in your brain is no longer that 7.3 and it's now either alkaline or acidic, it causes your circulatory system in your brain to start breaking down. And 2 things will start to occur. First of all, you might have hemorrhagic activities, so strokes, vascular dementia. And second of all, you might have some clots that develop in your system, and therefore, again, that causes cell death in the area where those blockages occur. I also make sure that, with my strategy, from a neurological function and perspective, your brain is no longer able to actually regenerate itself. And as that happens, then you start to have what we call brain atrophy. So your brain cells start to die slowly but surely over time. You won't feel it now because you're overcompensating by doing things, in a way that will just keep your brain tagging along. But as you get older, it gets to a point where your brain can't cope anymore, and therefore that's when you start to see some of the elderly-related conditions, which don't start with age, but they actually start because of the choices that we make at a very young age. What are some of the things that will actually cause that chain to be effective? Well, breaking the chain means that if your chemical function, if your neurological function, as well if the circulatory function is altered, your brain cells start to die. So if you look from the left side, you see a healthy brain. Cut it in half, left and right hemisphere, that's what it should look like. But when you start to look at the middle illustration, the brain is now much smaller. And if you look at the extreme right illustration, whilst it's much, much smaller, you also have gaps in between the cortex areas. And those gaps are actually brain cells missing. And that's what happens when you have brain atrophy. Now, you might not be able to see it now, but you start to experience certain things occurring over time. And on Friday, we will talk about the question about dementia and when does that actually start. And this would be my strategy because I know that it starts much earlier by the choices that people will make. So what happens when you've got that broken chain? Well, our brain is divided into 6 main regions. Okay? You don't have to remember them, but all I want you to consider is in your relationship with your brain, which areas are you likely to damage as a result of the lifestyle approaches that sometimes people may adopt. So the parietal lobe, which is right at the top here, is responsible for language and touch. The occipital lobe is responsible for vision. The cerebellum is responsible for balance and coordination, the brainstem for breathing, heart rate, temperature, and so forth. The temporal lobe is responsible for hearing. And by the way, just a little bit of side information. When I clap my hands, I make sound. But sound is not actually coming from my hands clapping. Sound is actually created in our brain. So let's look at physics. When I clap my hands, I'm only displacing atmospheric particles into a wave. That's why our ears are shaped like this, such that those waves are channeled into the inner ear, whereby they are converted into vibration, and then from the vibrating discs in our brain or the vibrating drum, then you've got the cochlea, which actually then converts that vibration into electrical impulses, and then in your temporal lobe, the electrical impulses are processed into sound. So when you start to have hearing challenges and difficulties, a lot of people have been told it's just to do with age, but actually it's one of the first indications that your brain chemical function, neurological function, and circulatory function is starting to change. Your frontal lobe, most important, is responsible for thinking, making decisions, being able to process, retain information for you to be able to make the right choices. It's also responsible for memory, for behavior and movement. So what do we know? If we load our brains with sugar and so many other metals and things that will change chemical function, you will start to see the frontal lobe struggling. If you put diesel in a petrol car, you might start it and only drive for maybe 1 kilometer or 2, but soon after that you lose power, then you lose a lot of things, and you might even lose the engine completely. Same thing with our brain. What is your relationship with your brain? The things that you put in it, if it's garbage, then the function of each of those areas becomes distorted and also becomes a challenge. So you start to forget things. So I had a lady who I was supporting. This is going back a couple of months ago. She'd come over to visit her family, and she was struggling with a number of things: sleep, headaches and, brain fog was the biggest thing that she was worried about. So I, met with her and we had a conversation and I said, look, what's happening with your brain fog? I'm so stressed. I'm so worried because I don't know whether I'm developing dementia. I can't remember things. I can't remember where I've put, items. I can't remember what I'm supposed to do. And I just have this feeling in my brain whereby I can't explain it, but it's just like something is sitting on my head. So we talked about the function of the frontal lobe. I asked her to keep a diary of what she was eating and actually just identified simple changes that helped her frontal lobe to be able to function in a much better way. So technically, we took away the diesel can that she was holding and gave her a petrol can. Why? Because her car was driving on petrol. And what happened was after a couple of months, when I met with her again, she was a completely different woman. Not only was she physically looking fit because she lost weight in that short period of time, she didn't have any bags under her eyes. She was smiling without even any prompt or stimulation or anything else. Her skin tone was very different. It looked as if she was a younger version of herself. And most importantly, she was saying to me, Simon, I'm sleeping better. I'm actually able to do exercises. I've got energy. I'm able to think straight. I'm able to enjoy things and be able to participate in social activities and engagement. And it all came down to just checking what she was eating, checking what she was drinking, taking away coffee, taking away sugar, just introducing just natural things like water. And that's what her brain just needed. She wasn't even old. She was only in her early 60s. And I'm used to supporting people and doing consultation on people who are 105, who have lived with dementia for 40 years, and yet, they're able to maintain their brain function much better sometimes than a lot of 60-year-olds. That's the chain. So, what are some of the fun facts about the chain, and why would I use my strategy to try and, overtake and overcome Australia? Now, don't worry about this slide. This is just to give you an illustration of what we will cover, and I'm going to break it down one by one. Here are some fun facts. The brain composition. If you know how your brain operates, that it can help you to have a better relationship with it so that you're able to listen to it, you're able to respect it, and you're able to actually work together in partnership to improve your health whilst you're also improving its health. So here's the brain composition facts that you might need to know. 75% of your brain is water. 75% of your brain is water. So how much water should you be drinking in 24 hours if you want to maintain 75% of your water? How much water? Okay? The actual scientific calculation is 30 mils multiplied by your body weight. That's the actual calculation. So when you go back to your tent, just do a simple, workout. In the last 2 days, how much water did you drink versus what your brain needs? Because if you are below by 2%, we know that that's the risk factor whereby your frontal lobe, your parietal lobe, your temporal lobe, your cerebellum starts to change. If you already have neurological conditions, Parkinson's, stroke, and other things, that's why your balance and your gait starts to change. If you already have macular degeneration, cataract, glaucoma, that's why your vision starts to become blurred, because as your water content changes, therefore your chemical function changes, and ultimately it has a direct impact on your daily experiences. So water is a main issue. Now, when we talk about hydration, some people say to me, Simon, I drink well, and I ask them, what do you drink? Tell me, give me a diary of what you drink in 24 hours. Well, I drink about 5 cups of coffee. And I said, wow. And they said, no, don't worry. It's decaf coffee, so it's good. And I said, really? Really? Again, the devil works in very subtle ways, guys, and we need to be very smart about keeping our minds sober. We know the impact of coffee. It's a diuretic. And also, not only is it a diuretic, it actually is one of the reasons why you start to lose more water. And therefore, we know that for every cup of coffee you drink, call it decaf, call it whatever fancy name you want, you need to replace at least 2 equal amounts of cups with water, because it has an impact on your circulatory system. So this person was saying, I drink well because I drink 5 cups of coffee. And I say, what else do you drink? Oh, I drink, cordial, and I drink grape juice and so forth. And I say, when we look at the chemical compositions of all the things that you're drinking, you are much more dehydrated than someone who's actually only drinking 2 glasses of water in that same period of time. Hydration is a factor, and hydration is always misunderstood because there's a difference between fluid intake and hydration. When we talk about hydration, it's the factor of your body is 75% of water, not tea, not juice, not orange whatever, and so forth, especially when most of these processed juices are high in fructose, glucose, and other sugars. What else do you need to know? The makeup of your brain is approximately 100 billion neurons. 100 billion neurons. And here's an interesting fact. 50% of those neurons are permanent. And that 50% of neurons is only developed between the ages of 0 to about 11. So remember yesterday when we talked about research and parenting and grandparenting and why it's important to make sure that your kids are supported to be in well-being at a young age, because they are permanent neurons which form their character and behavior for the rest of their life are only formed at that time in their life. Which means later on, when they go to a psychologist, let's say they're 50 or 60, that's why they're always asked the question, tell me about your childhood. Why? Because all the other neurons that develop after that particular age, they're transient. They're not as permanent. And therefore, when you don't use them, you lose them. But those ones which are 50% are the ones that actually become your 50,000 thoughts that are naturally generated, and your 90% of decisions that you make subconsciously. They are based on who you are, and that's your background. Neurons, when they are working and firing correctly, they can transmit information at the speed of 250 miles per hour. But when they are clogged by chemicals and metals in the brain, then the speed reduces. And therefore, you start to see your language and your speech changing. You start to see your ability to concentrate changing. So sometimes people say, oh, this person has got concentration issues. Well, actually, let's go back to what's changing in their brain before we give them medication, which is likely to also then slow down even the rate and the speed at which their neurons are able to fire properly. So neurons divide in a system called binary cell division, which means that one neuron copied and replicated exactly in the same format and everything else, and RNA. But if that neuron is not healthy, what is it going to produce? Another neuron which is not as healthy. And if it's not as healthy, then its lifespan and duration is limited and reduced, and that's how you gain brain atrophy. So it starts by when your neuron cell division system is now altered, then the quality and the rate of cell division doesn't actually match what your brain needs. 25% of body cholesterol is in the brain, and that cholesterol is responsible for synapse development and formation of your neurons, as well as the nylon sheath that actually covers some of your neurons and makes sure that messages and chemical activities are not misinterpreted. And what it means is that if your metabolism is not great, either cholesterol is too high or cholesterol is too low, you start to see neurodegeneration occurring. What else do we need to know about brain? Well, brain development. Brains develop at a rate which is 3 times as fast when kids or children, or rather infants, are in their first year. And that's why babies, I used to wonder, why do babies always come out and they've got big heads? Because their brain is not always that big. But that explains it. Their big heads actually is to accommodate the rate at which the brain will grow and be able to fill up the brain. And therefore, again, when you say that we actually came from tadpoles or we came from some amoeba and so forth, then there's a big question. You need to have something really, wrong in the head, because the way we are designed, God already knew what he needs to actually, put in place in order for the brain to be healthy. The brain develops up to the age of 25, depending on the country and the region. In some countries where sugar is not as addictive because it's not in every product and people sleep better, they don't have too much screen time and things like that, chances are brain development might actually continue up to the ages of 30, although not at the same stage as when you are in your adolescent levels. At 20 years old, or roughly, your brain you start to lose memory bit by bit. So your ability to translate information into a hippocampus so that it's actually processed and stored there starts to diminish from that particular age. So if you're not doing physical activity or things that improve chemical, things that improve circulatory and neurological function, then the rate at which you start to forget also increases. So you can't concentrate, and therefore, again, as you can't concentrate, it changes your well-being. You don't fit into certain social circles, and therefore, again, isolation, depression. And that's why sometimes in people who are aged between 20, although 19 to about 24, the rate of suicide tends to increase. What else do you want to, and I'm going to be going quickly only because I want to make sure that I cover everything in detail. So, brain size does not matter. And why? Now, ladies, please do not pull any levers to make me disappear on stage, because this is just science. I'm just explaining how science works. So, the brain makes up 2% of our body weight, which is great. And this is what we know, again, from a neurological research perspective. When your weight increases, your brain also shrinks. There's that relationship which is there. So if your BMI is meant to be X, and your BMI goes beyond that, then be aware that over time, circulatory volume in your brain reduces, which means binary cell division reduces, which means neural function and so forth reduces, brain density and so forth also starts to change. So again, there's a relationship around weight as well as your brain weight. Average brain would weigh 1.5 kilograms. And a woman's brain would weigh 1.2 kilograms. A man's brain will weigh 1.37 kilograms. So yes, there is a difference in weight. A woman's volume, in terms of where the brain sits and how much it occupies, is about 1,130 cubic centimeters. Men's 1,260 cubic centimeters. But like I said before, brain size does not matter. What matters is brain health. So having a big brain doesn't mean that you're much smarter. Okay? It just means that you need more water to keep that particular brain a little bit healthier. All right. What else do we need to know about the brain? Well, its function. Let's look at some of the things that might be of interest. Our brain utilizes about 20% of oxygen supply. Therefore, if oxygen reduces, then brain function also reduces. But also there's a 5-minute factor, which means if your oxygen supply is altered or distorted for a period of 5 minutes, then you actually start to see brain cell death. Oops, I think I pressed too quickly. So our brain uses 20% of our energy, which is why people get addicted to sugar. Because when your body starts to think that we don't have enough glucose, glycogen, sucrose, and so forth in the system, then your brain starts to tell you that we need energy, and therefore you make the wrong decision and think, I'm going to pick up something that's going to be sweet and give me enough energy. But again, it's just your brain telling you that you need to just change maybe the type of energy that you eat in your carbs and how you manage your carbs so that you have a slow release that allows a longer period of time. And that's the science in weight loss, and that's also the science in brain health. So the brain does not feel pain, by the way. I don't know if you knew that. So when you have a headache, it's got nothing to do with your brain, okay? Because the brain doesn't actually feel pain. It only helps to translate information that comes from, different stimuli, nociception stimuli, and it only just tells you that something is not quite right. But what happens with the headache is chemical changes that are occurring, or circulatory changes, i.e. oxygen levels and things like that. And therefore, sometimes people immediately jump to pain medication to try and turn off those messages. But if you have a diesel car and you put petrol in it, what did we say happens? You lose your engine. So blood flow is an average 1 liter per minute, but if your circulatory volume is low, it's not going to be 1 minute, 1 liter per minute. But also if your body weight is over the healthy level, it means that, again, your heart has more areas to circulate blood, and therefore, again, it changes circulatory volume in the brain. And that's one of the 3 fundamental things that we need to be aware of. Our brain produces 50,000 thoughts per day, and 95% of the decisions that you make actually come out from your brain, from your subconscious mind. So what you feed your brain actually helps you or doesn't help you in terms of how you feel. What else do I want to highlight? Well, it's estimated that 70% of mental health chatter is negative. So when we talk about, naturally, our brains are just sociologically geared to look for the negative. It only takes willpower and choice to be able to control your subconscious mind and focus on the positive. What causes people to be in a state of ill-being? It is when they look at their world from a negative perspective. So if your brain is not healthy, then in actual fact, the way you see your world also becomes unhealthy, and that actually contributes to how you feel and other factors around depression, anxiety, and so forth. So from a homeostatic function, our pH for our brain is meant to be 7.3. There's no way to go and measure it, so please do not ask me for devices that will measure your pH. I can tell you the things that will change your pH. However, if I were the king of SIMPED, planning to actually go and invade Australia, I will sell you devices so that you don't focus on the things that matter, you focus on just stats. But here are some of the things that you need to be aware of. When your pH changes, you also affect what we call flux. And flux is to do with your genetic makeup of your brain and how your brain neurons are actually formed. It also means that metabolism changes. And also your membrane responses also change. So your brain cell health also changes. Sleep deprivation causes brain atrophy. So when you don't sleep, whilst your brain doesn't actually regenerate, you also cause more cells to die. Creativity, learning, and memory only happens when you are in level 4 sleep called REM sleep. It means that if you're not remembering things and you're struggling to concentrate and you're struggling to actually understand information and process information, you don't need a tablet for it. We know that your sleep and circadian cycle is altered. What we need to find out is do a sleep study, and we will talk about what sleep studies and sleep hygiene looks like. But that's a way your brain is telling you that something chemically is not quite right. But if I was the king of SIMPED, what would I do? I wouldn't tell you this information. I will sell you sleep medication and also medication to manage behavior and medication to manage memory. In actual fact, I wouldn't be here because I've been making so much money, busy planning how to actually, produce all these things. All right. Another point I wanted to just raise quite quickly is your intestines contain 100 million neurons. So serotonin, in particular, is related to your gut health. So when you are not eating well, it means that your gut health changes. And what also changes? Chemical function in your brain. So things like serotonin, you can take medication, you can take antidepressants, but that actually won't fix the issue. Sometimes it's something as simple as the time that you last eat. And we'll talk about sleep function, so come and listen a little bit more to how you can just change how your circadian rhythm could work by understanding homeostasis. So, having said that, how would my change strategy work? Well, it's quite simple. I told you that it's about destroying your brain. And if I destroy the brain, then it's easy. You're not able to see, think, plan, understand, and actually be active, both mentally and physically. And that's an easy way because then I can take over the country quite easily. So how that works is that there's a chain reaction, and that chain reaction is triggered by these 3 sisters. Someone said that sends spies. Who is it? Yeah? So I will have my own spice. And the first one is sugar. That's what I'll call her. The second one I'll call her screen time. More than 4 hours a day. and also in the evenings. And the third one would just be sleep deficit. Those are my 3 spies that I will send, and I know they'll be super effective. But what would they do? What would they do? Because if you know what they do, then you can know how to actually protect yourselves, right? First of all, they'll just cause inflammation. So the metals that we absorb and the metals that we take, either through medication or through self-diagnosis of certain things, and therefore we take some chemical compounds, sugars, the type of fat that we actually take in our diet, and brain injury will cause inflammation. And once you have inflammation, then the chemical function of the brain changes. The circulatory function of the brain changes, as well as the neurological function of the brain changes. But inflammation causes metabolism also to be altered. So if you're taking too much metals, and I did a little bit of a sleep study on myself, I did an audit of all the things that are in my bathroom that had metals in them. And I took them aside and put them away. And I wanted to see what will happen from a chemical perspective in terms of my appetite, hunger, as well as my sleep. Now, I actually, because I look at these things, and sometimes I know that it sounds like, Simon, are you telling me that if I just look at, avoiding metals, then that would make a difference? Well, I tried it myself and it worked. Because again, my sleep quality was different. Having good dreams. Because my brain is actually active in the right level of sleep, and therefore, when I wake up in the morning feeling very rejuvenated, clarity, being able to plan, being able to do things, and also my energy levels very, very different. Initially, I was struggling to fast. But now, I can actually eat one meal, and sometimes when I'm traveling, it's not an issue. I can actually do a full day, even miss the dinner, and that doesn't actually cause me an issue. Why? Because my metabolism has since improved when I started considering some simple things that were adding metals into my system. So metals equals to poor metabolism because they produce what we call free radicals. And those free radicals are like toxins. And therefore, instead of your hepatic portal system focusing on the good function, it's busy trying to get rid of all those metals, and that's how you start to see, again, your ability to have energy levels changing. Why? Because your mitochondria, which is your powerhouse, is now overloaded and therefore can't produce enough energy. And when you don't have enough energy, it's easy to be tempted to go for sugar, which is a quick fix. In my strategy, those 3 sisters will affect your circulation, as we talked about oxygen, nutrients, and hydration, not in the right cells, and therefore that causes cells to age much quicker. And as cells age much quicker, then a lot of people will actually start to have those neurological conditions at a much younger age. Why is it in other parts of the world, people can live up to 105? And not have as much neurological conditions and issues. I gave you an example of, in England, our average age of admission in the population of people that I was managing was 92. That was, of course, pre-COVID. I know in Australia, the average age of admission in care homes is 79 to 81. Big difference. And we'll talk about polypharmacy and how a lot of younger people at 79 take up to 43 medications for information that is to do with just brain health. So brain atrophy is the main issue with those 3 areas. So when you have brain atrophy, memory, behavior, and neurological conditions become an issue. So if we were to summarize what research talks about and just look at what are some of the things that can help you. Well, yesterday we talked about well-being. Yes, now that you know what my strategy, if I were to, come and invade Australia is and how effective it is, these are some of the things that you might want to think about. So I was involved with the Thomson Institute, and there's a guy called Professor Ponolog. He was doing a longitudinal study on brain function and sleep function. And some of the things that he was picking up, which are, and I think you've heard this quite a lot, if you want to maintain good brain health, number 1, sleep and exercise. Then, of course, mindfulness is for people who actually don't connect with religion and also with God. But in place of mindfulness, I would say check your relationship with God. Because your well-being is based on the closer you are to God, the stronger your faith is, but most importantly, the more you feel God's love. Because when you've got God's love, then as a foundation to your hepatic portal function, you start to actually not seek food, seek risky behaviors or activities that damage your brain by making you feel good. Then you also need to think about social networks. We talked about relationships. You need to think about your diet. And I focus on how do you keep temperance. I'm not going to be telling you that don't eat this, go and buy this and do that, because our health message right from the beginning as designed by God is more than sufficient if you just exercise temperance. But here's one of the reasons why, if I were the king of Simped, would use and target the Seventh-day Adventist, I would just get them to stop preaching the health temperance message. And then get them to focus on supplements. Get them to focus on all these other things which for most people are not achievable, and therefore people give up. And yet I know in all the 21 years I've been sort of working with people with neurological conditions and so forth, that just our health message, which is based on temperance and moderation, makes a big difference. So, what are your takeaways as we close? Well, the first thing is, let's keep it simple, okay? Brain health is not complicated. You don't have to be a neuroscientist. All you need to do is just follow these simple steps. Number one, don't hang around with the three sisters. Why? Because they are my spies. And who are the three sisters? And it's simple. Yes? Very simple. And you know for yourself where you need to start exercising temperance when it comes to your sleep pattern. And if you don't know yet, then come to the sleep sort of workshop that we're going to be doing, and I will give you some very simple, practical, and achievable ways that you can start to trick your brain and gain control of your sleep cycle. The second thing, which is very easy, is increase brain foods. Now, take note, I'm not saying go and buy supplements, because it's interesting how a lot of researchers and a lot of clinicians would say, this is what's going to work, and then at the end, they'll give you a pamphlet and say, well, I'm actually producing these health supplements which you can take, and they will work magic, and they'll help you. If your car is running out of fuel, and your car uses diesel, and you go and put petrol, it doesn't matter whether you fill it up to the brim with petrol, it's not going to work unless you go back to the beginning where, the root cause is when it comes to your brain health issues. So I would say, brain foods, and brain foods are very easy. I'm not going to give you a list of go and buy A, B, C, D. I'll just say to you, foods that are colorful and not sweets, by the way. Because then you're going to say to me, Smarties are colorful and so forth. Foods, natural foods that are colorful. Simple. If you just think about what did you eat for breakfast, what are you eating for lunch, just add a food that is colorful. That's a very simple format that can help to change the way you eat. And it's easy to achieve. Physical exercise. And again, I'm not going to start telling you to say, go and run a marathon, because not everyone is designed to run a marathon. I'm not going to say go and do a power walk for 2 meters or whatever the case is, because temperance is about just considering, if you're not doing anything, what could you start with? Something that is personal to you, something that is achievable, something that you can plan into your daily routine, because success does not come from a methodology. Success comes from just understanding your body and working and having a good relationship with your brain. What can I motivate my brain to do? And therefore, if you can work on that one, then it becomes sustainable. That's where you see change that is meaningful. So hydration is another one. Go and do a calculation. How much did you drink so far? And I know that one is scientific, because that's the first important thing that actually causes people to sleep and not be able to concentrate. So if you're falling asleep right now, I know how much you haven't drunk. All right? And lastly, just watch your metals. Watch your metals, okay? Simple things that sometimes we don't think about. I love cars. And sometimes, and men, I'm sure you will resonate with this, On Sundays, sometimes I would love to wash my car for hours. And I can actually wash it from morning till evening, detail everything, make sure that the trims are black where they need to be black. Everything is just no sand grains in the carpet or anything. It actually, makes me feel good. But here's the thing that I actually picked up. When I'm washing the car and I'm not wearing gloves that protect me from all the metals that are absorbed in my skin, then in actual fact, that contributes to my free radicals. Simple thing like washing up. And ladies, I know you like me for this one, but this is not what I'm suggesting which you're going to be thinking. Okay? Washing up. Okay? Washing up liquid. So if you're washing up using liquid every day, just think about the metals that you absorb, because our skin is the largest organ on our body. And therefore, what we put on our skin from a transdermal perspective actually absorbs directly into our system. So when we talk about metals, it's not just about what you eat, it's about what you apply on your body. I picked up one of my deodorants and I looked at it, and the number of metals that were in it, I just threw it straight in the bin without even thinking. Okay, so I'm not saying walk around not having deodorant or anything, but I'm just saying just be mindful and exercise temperance. God didn't actually put us on this planet to punish us by actually sacrificing ourselves and not being happy, but trying to keep healthy. But I'm just saying that if you exercise temperance by using the information that I've shared with you, then it goes a long way in taking simple steps that will improve your quality of life. So at the end of it, 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 8, be sober-minded and be watchful. Be what? Watchful. For what? Be watchful for the things that are going to damage your brain. Because your brain damage doesn't actually happen when you just get older. It happens at the point when your brain is developing or when it stops developing and is no longer able to cope with some of the things that you've exposed it to. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. And in this case, the devil's strategy is just attack your mind, just attack your brain, and everything else becomes easy. The brain message is not complicated. Don't make it complicated. If we had time, I'll be telling you so many stories of people that I've just been able to help with the simple message that God has given us. We know the message. Sometimes the challenge is making the right choices. Go and make the right choices. Thank you very much. Lovely to see you, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow when we will talk about, again, how do we take well-being and the brain health message into the next level, and we'll be talking about sleep, and then we'll talk about other aspects of medication and therefore dementia on Friday. Okay? Meanwhile, have a wonderful afternoon.